Ladies and gentlemen, please do not panic, but scream. Scream for your lives. This is the No Fear Podcast. We know what scares you. I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 15 of season 5. And can you really have too much Vincent Price in your life? We don't think so, which is why we watched maybe the best movie ever, The Tingler.
So I'm going to get us started on the episode. As Lisa just mentioned, we watched The Tingler for this particular episode. As I think we always say, I don't know that necessarily, I don't know. I feel like you can talk about something and then go watch it or read it. But if I do recommend, if you've never watched The Tingler, again, as we've said before with these Vincent Price movies, you can pause us and go watch The Tingler. It's on Prime. You'll have to rent it, but you can watch it and then come back. So before we get into a discussion of our impressions and just a discussion of the movie in and of itself, I am going to just give a brief overview of the movie. So this movie, The Tingler, was produced and directed by William Castle. The screenplay was by Rob White, who also did the screenplay for House on Haunted Hill. So, as I was looking up stuff about The Tingler, I was like, why does that name sound familiar? That may sound familiar to you listeners, especially if you're listening to our Vincent Price episodes back to back to back. The cast of The Tingler, which came out in 1959, was headed up by Vincent Price, who was playing a doctor, a pathologist. He does autopsies, I believe, at the prison, but also just on his own time. That was kind of his job. Dr. Warren Chapin, and he is studying fear and its effects on the body. Judith Evelyn played the character of Martha Higgins, who cannot speak or hear or scream, which is important in the plot of the movie. She's a co-owner of a theater with her husband. According to her husband, she tried to kill him. This is just a throwaway line that kind of surprised me because I didn't see any of that coming or any explanation. A little trivia with her, she was in Rear Window in the movie Giant. She didn't live very long after The Tingler, but she was in several movies, 2 of which were Rear Window and Giant. Philip Coolidge played her husband, Ollie Higgins, the other co-owner of the theater, and her murderer, though I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that and how that worked out. Patricia Cutts played Isabel Chapin, the quote-unquote bad wife. There seem to be a lot of quote-unquote bad wives in Castle movies. She and Vincent Price are trying to kill each other, reminiscent again of House on Haunted Hill. Pamela Lincoln played her good sister, Lucy. Isabel keeps threatening to take Lucy's inheritance away if she doesn't marry a proper person. Daryl Hickman, who was a prodigious child actor, but then continued acting beyond his childhood years, played David, Lucy's boyfriend and Warren's lab partner. And Warren and David keep really long hours trying to discover the source of fear. They believe that there is something in the body that attaches to your spine and makes you feel a tingle when you're scared. And if you scream, it relaxes. If you don't scream for whatever reason, or you become overwhelmed by your fear, it is so strong it can crack your spinal column and kill you. And so because of the importance of this idea of an organism that is inside our body and grows with our fear and attaches to our spine, and the idea of tingling, William Castle, famous for his gimmicks and little things that he would do to help garner attention for his movies. We talked about this last time with the skeleton flying over the audience in House on Haunted Hill, and at one point, I believe, making people sign an agreement that they wouldn't walk out of the movie. Maybe it was an agreement that they wouldn't sue if they had a heart attack. It was something that effective. It was so scary. This particular movie, he used what he called percepto, which was a haptic or tactile sensation. So basically, some of the seats in the theater were rigged up to deliver physical shocks. Kind of like I think we talked about before, the idea of moving seats when you're watching action movies, or like the 4D when you get sprayed with water when there's water in the 3D movie and that sort of thing. So the idea that I always remember with this movie that Matt was reading from is the moment when the Tingler's free in a movie theater and they're telling people to scream. So at that point, people would be getting shocked in the movie theater with you and screaming. Some small theaters, when they do Castle revivals, do this, use Percepto. In addition, Castle also, even though it's a black and white movie, used color in the movie only for the blood in the bathroom sink and tub when Martha Higgins, Judith Evelyn's character, was being scared to death. And then I believe this was some trivia that Lisa dropped in our doc, but there is a Joe Dante film called Matinee in 1993 where John Goodman plays a William Castle-esque filmmaker. Apparently I have not seen this movie, though I've heard of it, and I need to move it up on my list and just watch it already. But in the film, he's showing his new movie Mant, which is a man mixed with an insect hybrid, and he puts shockers in the seats, basically kind of riffing off of the Tingler and Percepto. So that's a little bit of the background on this movie. I guess I'll go ahead and throw out my impressions first before I toss it to Matt and Lisa. I've watched this movie, I know, once before, maybe twice. I really enjoy it. I'm always a fan of Castle movies and, of course, Vincent Price. It's funny, though, watching it this time, last night, I remember distinctly the part about the people in the theater screaming and the idea of the electrified seats and Castle coming out beforehand with a silhouette behind him, kind of like Hitchcock telling you that if you felt a tingle, you need to scream or you would die. I remembered all that, but I did not remember all the twists and turns of the plot, and it has a lot going on. Like, I had forgotten about some of the machinations between the married couples and the fact that apparently Vincent Price uses like something like LSD. It's an interesting movie. There's a lot going on, but I enjoy it. It is entertaining. The Tingler creature just cracks me up when you can see the strings pulling it out of the cage when it's going to kill people. It's utterly delightful. Lisa, Matt, your thoughts about impressions of the Tingler?
Well, I guess I'll jump in. When we were coming up with ideas for Vincent Price movies for this Vincent Price Love Fest that we've been doing, I was so happy when we chose the Tingler. I know that there's a lot of other great candidates. He's fantastic in House of Usher and lots of other things that we could have chosen. But this movie, it's got a special place in my heart. I'm almost completely certain this was the first Vincent Price movie I ever saw. I'm not 100%, but like 95% sure. And I remember when I was growing up, probably like 6th or 7th grade, we were really good friends. Well, my parents were really good friends with our next door neighbors, and they had a daughter that was my younger brother's age and a son who was even younger. But I remember him. He loved the Beatles and he loved to talk about this movie. And those were the two things I really remember strongly. And so I remember finally actually watching The Tingler and going, oh, I see what he was talking about. This movie is like great, but probably not great in the way that William Castle and everyone else was expecting, because it is kind of bonkers in a lot of ways. But I've seen it a couple of times since then. I think the first time I saw it was definitely middle school age, like 6th, 7th, 8th grade, around then. And I've seen it a few times since then, but it's been a very long time. And so like you, Mel, I remembered the basic plot points and of course the gimmick of having the shocking seats and everything. But yeah, rewatching this movie, preparing for this episode, I was not prepared for just how utterly insane it was at sometimes, and I mean that in a good way. It's not a bad or unwatchable movie, and I have seen plenty of those. It's very watchable. It's very interesting, but the plot is, like you said, Mel, there's a lot that happens, and the movie's only like an hour and 20 minutes. It's not a long movie by any stretch, but there is a lot that happens in that time period. So I can't wait to dive in a little bit deeper, but I definitely want to hear Lisa's impressions and response to this movie before we do.
Oh, I love this movie. As much as I love this movie, I think my favorite Vincent Price, I'll just say, is House of Wax. That was my first. That will forever be my favorite, followed by House on Haunted Hill, because I think that is just Vincent Price at his best. This movie, though, nearly ties House on Haunted Hill for me. The things I love about this movie, it's Vincent Price being very Vincent Pricey, which I love. Everybody in this movie wants to murder somebody, I think. And if they don't, then they should, because they're being treated very badly. But yeah, there's so much going on. Okay, we'll get into it. One thing I do love about this movie is this is to me the epitome of what, like, it was the epitome of what, like, this era of movie was, if that makes sense. It's absolutely like a 50s, 60s, I guess you'd call it B-level horror. Mel, you mentioned the movie Matinee when you were doing your overview of this, and I did drop this in our notes because Matinee is another one of my favorite movies. I know I overuse the phrase, this is my favorite movie, but I have a lot of favorites. But I saw Matinee when I was younger and loved it. And I remember thinking, I wish they still did monster movies this way. Like, I still wish people put in the amount of, like, showmanship that, and this was before I really even knew who William Castle was. I knew who Vincent Price was because I had watched House of Wax many times, but I didn't even know that type of filmmaker existed until I watched Matinee and realized that these were real films that had occurred. And to me, The Tingler is what I don't know, it's just like the pinnacle of this type of movie to me. I do want to know, because Mel, you pointed out that Rob White had worked with Vincent Price on House on Haunted Hill, and he wrote this film. I had to look him up because I know I've recognized his name in a lot. He has a long writing career. He actually worked with Castle 5 different times. He worked on Macabre, 13 Ghosts, Homicidal, The Tingler, House on Haunted Hill. Several of those movies feature murderous women, and several of those movies feature husband and wives who are, like, desperate to kill each other. I don't want to make accusations about what was happening in Rob White's life. But to me, that is a fascinating turn. Not that you just want to, make these kind of fun B-level horror movies with a bunch of, like, William Castle style showmanship, but why? What is going on in the husband and wife dynamic? Because in House on Haunted Hill, there's just the one kind of rich, eccentric couple who wants to kill each other. But in this one, everybody who's married wants to kill each other. I think we only see 2 married couples in depth, and they both are just dying to, like, off the other one, which we don't see that too much in movies anymore. That seems to be something very much of this type of movie too. So I don't know what was going on there. That was my impression. That stood out to me this time. Again, I think it would not have stood out to me as much had we not just watched House on Haunted Hill, but I was just like, oh my gosh, what's going on? But yeah, this movie is crazy. It's got so many different things. You've got husbands trying to kill their wives. You've got a woman who's holding, I mean, she's basically like the equivalent of, like, the lord of the Gothic manor, and is holding the purse strings to everybody's fortune and is using it, to puppeteer them. You've got an old silent movie theater and this kind of love for the old silent films. You've got Vincent Price as the eccentric scientist, which he's wonderful doing. Yeah, you've got weird, like, an LSD type of drug that he takes that will give people waking nightmares. He's very unethical. I'll throw that out there. He's a very unethical doctor. He's a very unethical scientist. He seems okay with just experimenting on people without their consent or knowledge, which is a bit suspect. I like the idea that this movie encourages you to scream. That's kind of fun. I love what they do with sound in this movie. The instrumental music behind this is wonderful because for the most part it's creepy, but then every time a woman comes on stage or on screen, it does this like sexy saxophone jazzy type music, and then it goes back to the creepy music again. And then the silent film theater like sequence at the end is great, and the use of like the screen going black and people talking over it and like the chaos, the whole don't panic. Yeah, it's just fun. I would have loved, I'll tell you this will be the last thing I say before we jump into it. I want to see this in a theater. Like, I want to see this in a theater. I want Percepto in my seat, and I want it to be a full theater, just to experience everybody like watching this crazy thing with me. That would be a lot of fun. But yeah, why don't we just dive into it with the start of this movie? It starts with a warning from William Castle, which didn't surprise me at all. And then, just like House on Haunted Hill, this must be a Rob White thing too. He liked to open with a bunch of floating heads screaming and telling you about the movie that's to come. So yeah, who wants to start us off with the opening of this movie and getting to know Vincent Price as he's doing the autopsy?
Well, I'll jump in here. So, as Lisa was saying, the movie, after the William Castle's intro and the screaming heads, begins with a jailhouse execution for what we find out is a convicted murderer. We're not really given too much more information. It's said that he killed like two women or something, but then we get to meet Vincent Price, who is the doing the autopsy, which strangely seems to be in the prison itself. It's I'm not sure that that's actually where autopsies are performed. I would have assumed that they'd be taken to the morgue for the autopsy, but that does give this nice little meet cute that he has with the brother. No, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get the relationship right here.
The killer's brother-in-law.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. But he only refers to him as my wife's brother. He never says my brother-in-law. He always says my wife's brother. So I was trying to do the inverse of that. But yeah, the killer's brother-in-law. And so he sort of just shows up and inserts himself into the autopsy and strikes up a conversation with Vincent Price, or in this case, Dr. Warren Chapin. And it's the oddest opening I can think of, because, I mean, yes, he was there for the execution. His wife was not. Understandable, I can imagine not wanting to be present for your brother's execution. Understand that. But then he goes and talks to the coroner while conducting the autopsy. And that's how Vincent Price sort of brings up his research on fear and those sorts of things. And yeah, I feel like this whole interaction just sort of is an encapsulation of the movie itself. It makes sense until you start to really think about it and then go, wait, no, there's something weird about this. Like why he's just showing up for the autopsy and that sort of thing.
I think it's because Vincent Price even acknowledges that it's strange. Like when the guy and you're right, he inserts himself into the autopsy, and Vincent Price's character is basically like, people don't normally do this. Please don't faint. It's kind of like, here's a guy that I'm guessing you used to see at like Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, and now I've got him like splayed open on the table. I don't know why you're here watching this, but okay.
Well, I feel like there's an academic paper somewhere in Ollie Higgins' reactions to things, because he has got to be a sociopath or something, or just not in touch with emotions, because yeah, his reaction to his wife's death is, I'm okay. So not to jump too far ahead, but yeah, like I think Vincent Price's reaction of "What are you doing here?" and he's just like, "Oh hey," and they strike up a friendly conversation. It's just so weird, but it's because of this plot point that, and again, this is one of those weird things about this movie. The killer's brother-in-law asks for a ride home from the coroner and gets it. So you kind of have to go with this movie. But yeah, so Vincent Price gives Ollie a ride home, and then Ollie invites him up for like a cup of coffee. And it really, like when I jokingly said meet cute, like it really does feel like for a little while they're almost like kind of courting each other in some weird way. But that's where we get to meet Ollie's wife, the deaf mute, who also apparently has like a germophobic strain of OCD as well, which kind of goes unresolved. It's just sort of thrown in there. Did anyone else feel like that was just kind of thrown in there?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that it did was make her like not want to shake hands with people, but I don't know that it really did anything with the plot.
Yeah, like and she compulsively checks her safe to make sure that like the money hasn't disappeared, which is another, characteristic of OCD in a lot of people. But again, they didn't play it for comedic effect, so it wasn't like a comedy thing, which is good. One should not make light of that kind of mental illness, but yeah, they didn't play it for comedy. It didn't become a plot point. I kept waiting for that to come back up because it seemed like an odd detail to just sort of throw in there, especially for a movie from, the late 1950s. But sure enough, there it was. But yeah, there is the deaf mute wife, who is ends up becoming Dr. Chapin's unwilling patient, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. And it was almost like he was already experimenting on her from the very beginning, because when Ollie gives him the coffee and Dr. Chapin takes the coffee, I watched it 3 times. He just takes the platter under the coffee cup and throws it down. It's not even like acting like an accident. And then he's like, "Oh, my hands hurt." And I was like, I couldn't figure out why he would. I mean, I don't think Vincent Price could do an accent that poorly. And so I was like, is the doctor like testing her OCD? It was very strange. And then of course he's bleeding and he's like, "Look at my blood." And then we find out that that it makes her ill, that's something she's terrified of, and she passes out. And then, like you said, Matt, he realizes that this could be a person that would make a great experiment for him. And even though he's really kind to his wife's sister and to David, Price does a really good job of like going back and forth between truly seeming to want to help people and do the right thing, and just being cold-blooded and being like, I guess there were no forms you had to fill out for experimenting on people then, because I mean, he and David even talk about, well, they capture cats and dogs to experiment on. He experiments on his wife Isabel. They talk about getting the woman who can't speak or hear to experiment on. There's times when David asks him where he got his data, and he's like, don't ask that. We just can't publish it. And it definitely was this obsessive, eccentric scientist vibe going on.
I could definitely see that. And he definitely seems to view anyone who could potentially be useful, or anyone or anything who could be useful in his experiments on fear, as a subject. And I totally agree with the platter, and then her fainting at the sight of blood. It really does seem like he's deliberately testing her, because he sees this woman who not only can't talk but can't scream, and that becomes an important part of the I don't want to call it just flim flam, but really the bad pseudoscience of this movie. That we can discuss that a little bit later, I think. But yeah, I think he's clearly already got her in his sights. He's like, she can't talk, she can't scream. What happens when she sees blood and she can't scream? Oh my gosh, she faints. How terrible. I might have to experiment on her. Like a lot of the movie, he really is just making these cold-blooded calculations, even if it is for the good intentions of helping humanity or whatever.
Yeah, and this may be jumping too far ahead, so we don't have to talk about it now per se, but her death I felt was kind of ambiguous because, well, one, I didn't really see any evidence in the movie that she wanted to kill Ollie. I felt like that was just him trying to come up with a reason for why he would want to murder her. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should watch it again. I'll see something, but I didn't. But it was unclear to, like, I thought, because I didn't remember some things from the last time I saw the movie, I was like, is he giving her the LSD to scare her to death so he can experiment? But then Ollie scares her to death. They're not working together. So did the doctor, did Vincent Price actually decide to really, truly take care of her? And it was just Ollie scaring her to death, that it's the husband, like we know Rob White is interested in? Or is it like Gosford Park, where everybody's trying to kill poor Mrs. Higgins, and Vincent Price is just going to put it off on Ollie because his is easier to prove? I thought that was really interesting, and that was unclear. Probably it was that, but at the same time, I don't know. It seemed more like it was Ollie's machinations that killed her than purely an acid trip. Even though some of the things that happened to her were similar to what happened to Vincent Price, because Vincent Price has absolutely no ethics. He'll experiment on himself even. So yeah, I don't know. I thought it was interesting how they left that a little bit ambiguous. Is it Price's character trying to push the murder off on Ollie? Is it part of his experimentation? Is it both? Interesting choice, but also kind of disturbing.
Yeah, I had questions. I had questions about the science of this movie. I did not remember the twist. I guess it was supposed to be the twist that Ollie had killed his wife. I liked that it was ambiguous because I definitely thought Vincent Price was trying to. Well, I think he was trying to experiment on her. We had already seen him putting the giving himself the drug and like making himself hallucinate, and so when he gave her the drug, that's just what I assumed he was doing. Like, not trying to kill her, just trying to observe her. But her whole extended nightmare scene was so different from what we got with Vincent Price that, I don't know, it was played up really well, I thought, because in Vincent Price's nightmare scene, like where he's taken the drug, he's just saying like the walls are closing in, I can't breathe, he's acting it out, but we don't see anything. And then with her, it was really fun to watch because the whole movie was shot in black and white, but then the blood in the bath was bright red, and there was that hand coming up, and there was a hand with the axe. And so I don't know, the way the movie was playing it, I think we were supposed to believe that this was something different than just the drug that Vincent Price had taken. So I kind of lean on the idea that Vincent Price was experimenting on her but didn't want her to die, and that Ollie just took advantage of that. My whole thing is Vincent Price knows enough about the Tingler to know that like it will cause somebody to go rigid, and eventually he says it can split the vertebrae. Like it can break your spinal cord if you don't scream to like take away the strength of the Tingler. I don't know if they know what it does, but like somehow screaming makes the Tingler not as effective. But in this movie opens with that guy who died in the electric chair, and dude is screaming his head off before he goes to be executed. And it still, I guess, breaks his spinal cord because he says that during the autopsy. So I was a bit confused because I don't know if Vincent Price knows how the Tingler works.
I think you're asking too many questions, Lisa.
I wondered the same thing, and then I thought, well, he got electrocuted, so he didn't die from the Tingler. Maybe his screaming made the Tingler kind of go away, because remember, Price says he'll only be able to see one if he takes it from the woman who can't scream. because then the Tingler won't be power. I don't know. I'm trying to make sense out of no sense. But
well, yeah, and keep in mind that it begins as something that is microscopic and grows in size as the fear grows, and then the screaming is what makes it go back to being microscopic. That was Vincent Price's whole little monologue after he's extracted the Tingler from her and it's wreaked its havoc. He says, we have to put it back in her because she's dead and she can't feel fear, and it will go back to microscopic size. So yeah, there's so much pseudoscience going on here, and I both love it and hate it at the same time.
But at the end, it doesn't necessarily go away. It possibly reanimated her to kill Mr. Higgins. So
possibly.
Maybe we're just supposed to believe that Vincent Price's character is wrong and doesn't know what he's talking about. It's an unknown. You can't explain it.
All he knows is that he went too far. I think that was like the point of the movie, is he had his Dr. Frankenstein moment where he realizes that he went too far with science, and that I guess he doesn't know how it works, but he knows enough to know he shouldn't be messing with it because he wants to kill it, which is why he does put it back in her body. I will say I love the Tingler in the movie. I love that if fear was going to be embodied by something, I think having it as this multi-legged grub looking thing is kind of perfect.
It looks like a slug with centipede legs. I mean, for those of you who haven't seen it, I mean, imagine, but it's also 2 feet long too. So it's, yeah, no, I think that was a very good visualization. And I think that was really neat how they worked it in, because its shape, it would fit up the spinal column, and also its little legs would, I guess, extend out along the vertebrae. I don't know, but it definitely matches the physiology. So even if the pseudoscience is not so great, the creature design was.
And
I was going to say I loved what they did with it in the movie theater with the movie screen too, because it goes across the movie screen, but it's also across our screen. It would have been across the movie screen if you were in the theater. It reminded me a little bit of Gremlins, with the shadow of the creatures behind the screen coming after them.
Yeah, if nothing else, I'm a sucker for movies that have movie scenes in them. I was thinking about that the other day because, and this is so silly, but I loved the killing scene in Scream 2 that takes place in the movie theater, where they're all watching the scream, or a stab, I guess, in that, which is supposed to be the Hollywood movie of the version of the original Scream. And they're all in the theater and they're all, watching this scary movie, and then the killer's really there and really kills people. And there's that moment where it's chaos. And I love that, Mel, like you say, Gremlins, this movie, I thought, this is why I want to see it in the theater, because I was like, oh my gosh, how much fun would that be to be sitting there? And several times before that, you already have the screen go black. So the idea is it's happening. And then you've got Vincent Price's voice coming over, telling you to stay calm, that it's loose in the theater, and that's when you have to scream for your lives. It's just so much fun. And then when it finally does come back up, Mel, you're right, showing that white screen, and it's supposed to look like it's coming from the projector. Oh, so much fun. I am a sucker for that gimmick. I think movies, especially scary movies, don't utilize that enough. And maybe it's also just because I'm desperate to go to the movies right now. I miss movie theaters so badly. But, it's just so much fun. I loved that whole scene. And I love how they even kind of got the nostalgia of it, because even though this was filmed in what did we say, 59, it wasn't just any movie theater. It was a silent movie theater. And you had Vincent Price's character earlier just talking about how much he missed Charlie Chaplin movies. And I thought, oh, that's a nice dose of nostalgia. I don't know. It was exactly what I wanted. So, yeah.
I feel the same way about those kind of meta moments of having the movie theater within the movie and that sort of thing. I really like it. Well, I mean, it has to be utilized well, obviously, but I can't think of a bad example off the top of my head. But I was going to ask both of you, and I'm glad you brought this up, because aside from the fact that it was a silent film, did you see any connection between the film that they were playing in that theater scene and the larger plot of the Tingler? Because they showed lots of clips from that silent movie, which I meant to look up which one it was, and I did not. But I didn't really see any sort of connection. Like you mentioned with Scream, they're watching the Hollywood adaptation of the first movie in the theater, and a lot of times there will be a connection between what the audience in the movie is watching and what is actually happening in the film itself. And I can't find a connection that I can think of.
Yeah, I actually looked up that movie just because I was like, is this a real silent movie? I assume it is. I'm not sure. And it was. And I think if I remember right, I mean, I could look it up now, but I guess it's not as important as the main movie. But it had something to do with it took place in West Virginia, I think. And it was a guy who was like, he was basically trying to do his job. I think he was like an agent for the post office. And he was like trying to deliver this mail. And there was something about like a gang or a bunch of bad people, like a bad family had moved in and done something to somebody in his family. And so he's like he's basically spending the whole movie trying to do the right thing, like against all these people, standing up to them by himself. That was the impression I got from the summary. But yeah, I agree. I wasn't sure. I actually ended up kind of almost spacing out a couple times when the silent film was playing because I was thinking about what was going on in the Tingler movie. I didn't really see a connection between the two. I don't know. Lisa, did you see a connection other than the nostalgia fact?
No, I didn't. It was a film from 1930 called Tollable David, which was meant to be, it did take place in West Virginia. So it was kind of an Appalachian tale. It was supposed to be, I think, an update on David and Goliath. So the idea was like this guy who's, trying to make do against people who just want to stop him, I guess. I don't know. I couldn't tell from this. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I know that they said that this was apparently Mary Pickford's favorite film, that she talked a lot about it, and film critics talked about this as being a top silent film. Like, I guess today we talk about more like Charlie Chaplin type silent films, but this was supposed to be like, a masterpiece. So, but I don't think there was anything thematic that was there. I think it's interesting. I don't know.
I was just going to say, I just looked it up too because I was curious. Apparently, the silent film version came out in 1921, but they remade it in 1930. So there are two versions, and it was apparently based on maybe a book. It was adapted from a work in 1917. Yeah. I just wanted to jump in there because I'm assuming the version they showed was the 21 version because they probably wouldn't have had to worry about rights.
Yeah, it says, I do see that now. It does say 21. I don't know where I saw 1930.
It was remade in 1930 though, so that probably would have been more of a sound. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this was kind of like like an everyday working class man becomes a hero type story. Apparently, there was a good bit of violence for it, but it's considered like a culturally significant film. It's I feel like this is one of those films that probably I hesitate to say real film people, but like this. I don't know, that's really interesting. I'd love to know the reasoning behind why they did choose that, and if there was any significance. Maybe it was just a film that the filmmakers liked. I I did see looking up that actually when I was looking at that they do consider this to be like the Tingler, not Tolerable David, but the Tingler to be one of the earliest films to depict an LSD trip. So I think that, probably Vincent Price taking some drugs and hallucinating was a pretty big step for 1959.
I'm so glad you brought up the LSD because I had 100% forgotten about that between the last time I watched this movie and this time. And so that was I remember him reading the book about lysergic acid and then talking about the special acid he's procured, and it took me a second and I went, oh my god, Vincent Price is about to do acid, like this is happening. So that was a very interesting moment, not just him tripping, but they never call it LSD, and this is, I guess, before really it became such a cultural thing in the 60s, so that, they didn't refer to it as dropping acid or any sort of thing like that. But for him, it produced nothing but nightmarish horrors. And same with poor mute Martha Higgins, partly because she's being terrorized by her jerk of a husband to death. But like, were either of you surprised that there was acid in the movies? Like in this movie, I guess?
100%. I remembered, like I said, I remembered the creature part of this movie. I remember Vincent Price being a scientist and studying fear, and I remembered the creature. I had completely forgotten about the murderous husbands and wives, and I had definitely blocked out that LSD was a major part of this film.
Like an absolute major plot point.
Yeah, I had forgotten about it too. And when David first brought it to him and said something about it, if this is an acid, I was like, wait a second. Is this? Oh, okay.
Oh, it's that kind of acid. Got it.
And yeah, I had forgotten about a lot of the murderous shenanigans, and I was like, okay. Maybe next time I'll remember it, or maybe I won't. I don't know.
Well, speaking of murderous shenanigans, I do know that we're kind of getting close to running low on time. So I want to mention, I feel like we have to mention Vincent Price's wife. We kind of mentioned her as this bad wife at the beginning of the episode, kind of in the overview, but I think she deserves more of a mention than that, because I mean, it's very, 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 very heavily implied that she has been having many affairs with Vincent Price, or with on Vincent Price, I guess. She has been cheating on him constantly. He makes multiple allusions to this. Not only him, but also her sister, Lucy, mentions it as well, that because he's been working so long and away, that she's been keeping the company of some really bad men. But then, like, there's so many twists with their relationship where, like, you think that he's shot her, but it turns out that he just fired a blank from the gun to scare her into fainting so he could try to extract a Tingler, and then she poisons him so that she can leave him because he doesn't die, and she packs her bag and leaves while he's passed out after setting the Tingler loose on him. It's very weird. Her character did remind me a lot of his wife in House on Haunted Hill as well. I know, I don't remember who one of you mentioned kind of that parallel already, but very similar character. But I don't know what else to say.
I wondered if she left just because her murder plot with the Tingler didn't work, and she was like, I'm getting out of Dodge before he reciprocates.
I felt like that was kind of a part of it, but it's never really clear if she was planning on murdering him and leaving regardless, or the murder part failed, and so she's like, well, time to hightail it on out of here.
I mean, to take her side for a moment, she has basically single-handedly financed his ability to do all this research. I mean, I guess he gets paid for being the pathologist for the prison, maybe, but he's definitely not making enough money to help them survive. And I mean, I'm not saying she's not cruel in some of her machinations and kind of diabolical, but like in House on Haunted Hill, it goes both ways. And I don't know. I feel like she's just kind of tired of taking care of him and financing everything, and feels like her sister would be doing the same thing with David. And of course, it's a recurring trope in older horror movies in particular that, these scientists work all the time and never give attention to their wives. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I shouldn't have just been like bad wife, because it's not like he's not like running through her money. But at the same time, yeah, there's definitely this kind of like, I don't know, like punishing her in a way for all the cheating and everything. But she gets away in the end. I don't know, Lisa, what do you think?
She was an interesting character in this, because part of me wondered, I don't know. Okay, so she had the means. She could have left him a long time ago. Like, she could have just stopped paying for his crazy experiments and gone on to live a fine life, because apparently she had boyfriends and she had money. So part of me was confused why she stayed with him, especially because even though the movie tried to play it off like she was just a horrible person, because that's what her sister kept repeating that, like, oh, is my sister being mean and horrible again? That was kind of like her role in that, was just to kind of, I guess, be the nice sister and make her sister look even more of the evil one. But Vincent Price was nasty to her too. It's not even that he experiments on her in a very horrible way, like to shoot her with a blank and scare her that badly. But, to corner her and say, like, I could kill you now, and because I'm a doctor, I can make it look like a suicide and nobody would believe it. And he keeps saying, like, I know what kind of poisons to give you so that they won't show up later. And I don't know. I just thought Vincent Price turned so mean to her so quickly that, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think you're right, Mel. Sympathy isn't the right word that I feel for her, but I'm curious to know more of her story. Like, why did she stay with? There was no reason, at least in the House on Haunted Hill. Like, the wife wasn't the one in control, because she had no money. She had no, it was all Vincent Price's character. But in this one, those roles are flip-flopped. Like, she has no reason to keep him around or to keep paying, which makes me kind of wonder if she didn't really love him at one point and maybe still does, or if she's scared of him. I don't know. It was she was a fascinating character. I have no answers, except she's fascinating.
Well, and there was so much unexplained about their relationship that I think you're right. We could kind of come up with lots of different reasons for why she stayed. I do, or why she stayed as long as she did, I guess I should say. But I think it is worth making the point too that she's the one with the money. It was clearly her house that she had inherited from their father. Why was she the one leaving? Why didn't she kick Price to the curb? Like, after all of that, she leaves the house, this gigantic mansion, and that was a point that I just never quite set right with me, unless it was just to keep from, well, like, I think it was you, Mel, who said that maybe she was worried about what he might do as revenge, or that he might call the cops on her or something. But still, I don't know. It just didn't make sense to me.
I thought it was interesting that, he says that he can prove that she killed her fathers, that she could inherit everything. And she seems really scared about that, like he's telling the truth. And so that also made me think that they're kind of cut from the same cloth. And maybe that's partially why they got along so well. I mean, he needed her money to do his thing, and she wanted the money. I don't know. It's a weird relationship. It's almost like the joy in a relationship comes from trying to outmaneuver each other and the threaten each other.
Oh my
Who has
goodness.
the upper hand?
I just realized they're the Dr. Cox and Jordan from Scrubs, that relationship of constant one-upmanship.
And maybe sicking the Tingler on him and it not actually killing him was the final straw in that. She was like, oh, I don't want to stay behind for what may happen. There's something, I don't know. We could have like a whole series of movies on their relationship explaining what the heck is going on. But yeah, I'm glad that we talked about her, because in my notes, I just kind of went like, sister seems good. She's supposed to be bad, but she's so much more complex than they kind of, I think that they even realize maybe in presenting the movie, because you're thinking like 1950 standards, you kind of have this like black and white type dichotomy set up, but really it's a lot more fascinating, and is kind of flip-flop of House on Haunted Hill. With that said, I think we could probably end here. I mean, we could probably talk for another 30 minutes about those two, but I don't know that we would come up with any reasoning or explanation. I think it's pretty clear, listeners, that we all enjoy this movie. So, I mean, if you have not watched it yet and you hung with us, I still think there are things that we didn't talk about, and I think just seeing it on the screen is great. So definitely check it out at some point if you haven't. We are at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you've watched The Tingler and you want to tell us something about your response to it, or you have any questions for us, or want to recommend other Vincent Price and Castle films, feel free to contact us on social media or Gmail. If you love what we are doing, consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can get access to exclusive content. So every other week when we're having an off week, we have mini episodes on Patreon that you can listen to. And so far in our Vincent Price series, we've talked about the film noir Laura, and we've talked about Vincent Price's appearance on The Muppet Show. So those are two mini episodes connected to this series. But we totally understand, with the way things are right now, that you might have better places to put your finances, or there's just all kinds of stuff going on right now. So if that's just not an option for you to support us on Patreon, if you know someone who you think would like the show, tell them about it. Tell a friend, tell a family member, or rate and review us on your podcast app, especially with Apple Podcasts. They have an algorithm where the more ratings and reviews that we get, it helps other listeners find us. And it's entirely free, as opposed to Patreon. I just want to throw out that our theme music that we have now is by Nicholas Gasparini. Thank you so much for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.